And thank you so much, Martin, for inviting me here. It's great to have an opportunity to show a variety of work that I've made. I'm going to give you a very slight introduction to my background, because I know some of you know me, but some of you don't know me at all. I studied fine art painting at Chelsea Art School in the 60s. But after I left art school, I got involved in film, in the Filmmakers Co-op. One of the first people I met was Stuart, when I went to the Filmmakers Co-op to find out, how to make your own prints, really, how to make, use the processing machines that they had, and to bring down the costs, because all trying to avoid the total cost of the laboratories. So I embarked on filmmaking, and I got into teaching very early, just through a sort of bit of nepotism, actually, which I won't go into at the moment. But and got some very, very talented students to work with, and we all went down to the co-op and started to do all kinds of stuff. So the 70s for me was a real crunch time in terms of learning so many different skills, and you'll see in this program quite different tendencies in my work, one is the handmade film. So I've been trying, as Martin suggested, I'm not really an animator, although I work at Middlesex University with him in the animation department. I'm not really an animator, but my early work, some of it could be seen as a form of animation, so I've picked those out. And some of my later pieces are kind of time-lapse, so that's a form of animation. Anyway, I was doing handmade film, I was doing silent films made in camera, and I was doing these performances, which Martin mentioned, the one with the mirror and other ones, all around the same time. It wasn't too much later that I kind of was able to separate these different tendencies out in my own mind and work out what was going on. But I think really underneath it all is an attempt to just explore all the amazing possibilities of film and to find new forms. It was completely anti-narrative, anti-storytelling. That's where I part company with animation. That side, I don't really have a lot of understanding of it. It's just not part of what I am. But anyway, animation is a broad church, as Martin says. So I'm going to go back to one of my first experiments in film, which I never showed actually at the time. It's called Sound Shapes. I'm trying to show a few films I haven't shown before. Anyway, I didn't show it till about maybe 5 years ago for the first time. And this is the first time I've shown this colour version in England. It was made in '72 by hand with fascination with the optical sound track, which is the edge of the film that will create sound directly. But I can talk about that later if you want to explain the technology behind that. It's very rudimentary technology, but it gives you a chance to make image and sound all in the same way, sort of physically working with the material. So I was investigating rhythm in this first one. It's called Sound Shapes. I mentioned that. Lights.
Do you mind thumping on the switch outside? Thank you. Yeah, just give it a good thump.
Okay. Right, okay. Oh, thank you. Well, this next one was a request actually by Stuart. I saw Stuart the other day at the opening to Stephen Ball and the St Martin's students film show, which I recommend you get to. And Stuart said, well, you're going to show at the Academy, aren't you? So I thought, okay, better show that one. This one, although I made contact with the Filmmakers Co-op, which does have all this amazing equipment for processing and printing, it was actually made at home on a very rudimentary little copying machine. You take the film, and you all know what film this thing, because you can never be sure these days, but what people know and what they don't know. But that's a piece of 16mm film. So you basically just take the raw film or film with an image on it, and this is a found film, and then you copy it by running it under a light source with a wheel that just drives it through, and you just put it into a bin, and you put it onto a spiral and put normal sort of photographic chemicals into it, and it will come out as a negative of for the image that you originally had. So if your original image is negative, it would be positive. So it took that idea of copying, and sort of like took it to the nth degree, really, of seeing how far I could push the idea of copying something. Well, anyway, that's enough, I think, so we'll just run.
Sorry, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, please do, yeah. Happy to take questions.
I always thought I knew how you made this film, and then you described some process that I didn't understand. And you said
how did you think on that?
So, well, I thought it was a 16mm leader that you normally get, on that's got the pips and whatever.
Yeah.
You ran it through the printer, processed it, took that print.
Yeah.
But and you just sort of recycled it, sort of re-looped it, so that it sort of moved through a whole sort of period of degradation by reprocessing it, printing it and reprocessing it, and then joining all the pieces together again. Sometimes getting the embossed effect from sort of negative and positive together.
Yeah, which is useful too, I think.
Yeah, but you seem to be describing something else.
No, it's just the machine I used was not I didn't do it actually at the Filmmakers Co-operative. On their debris contact printers, which are like big industrial machines. I did it at home on a little sprocketed wheel, which was used for for counting the length of the film, really, I think.
You just did it in the dark, presumably.
I did it in a safe light with a safe light, because black and white stuff you can use in a safe light. And you could do it with a torch, actually. It's very easy. You can just expose the film with a torch and wind it by hand if you want. You can just lay it in strips under a piece of glass and turn the room light on. There's various ways you can do it. But so it's all the things you're describing, using positive, negative, and this thing called bas relief, which is where you put negative and positive together, and then you shine a lot of light through. And instead of them cancelling themselves out completely, you get a slight darkening of one side and a slight lightening of the other, which makes it look like there's an oblique light. And that was the idea behind the technique used in that very last section.
Can you say something a little bit about the rhythm of the composition? It seems to me that there's a key mathematical element of the images pulsing, how they repeat and so on. You have the countdown and so on. It seems to me that there's something mathematical happening there. Is it all done?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of mathematical happening in the first film, because that was the thing about film. One of the beauties of film, I first discovered it. It's like 24 frames a second. It's not like 27 or something. 24, which is a lovely number because it divides in so many ways. 8, 3, 6, 4. So, with that film, do you mind if I talk about the long film?
Yes, go for it. Yeah.
With that film, you have. I was basically trying to, it's about visual rhythm. I think maybe I'm a sort of frustrated musician who wants to try and understand sound by making images of sound, and dividing, being able to have a 2 set against 3 rhythm against, 2 against 4 is quite straightforward, but 2 against 5, 3 against 5. 5 doesn't go into 24 by it's cheap. So that was a way of just exploring all those different sort of counter rhythms. If you're a drummer, you could try and actually do that. It's incredibly hard to do. Well, Academy Leader has also a mathematical thing behind it. By the way, it wasn't until much, much later, probably about 40 years after I made that film, I got an email from somebody in the States to say I didn't use Academy Leader. And I thought at the time it was Academy Leader, but it's not. Academy Leader is a very specific kind of leader. Can anyone fill me in on that particular subject? Academy Countdown Leader? It's the leader that's used to queue up films. Well, you've seen it twice now. Well, the first film had it as well. It's not usually projected for the audience. But Academy Leader does, I don't know what the interval is, about half a second or something between numbers. So it has a mathematical basis to the countdown. And it usually ends on, usually you get a beep on 3. Sometimes it's 2, it depends on the different countries, but in the different sort of practices. This one's a bit unusual because it's a double beat on 4, I think, with dee, and it's a BBC countdown unit. So I was kind of lucky with that because it makes the soundtrack a lot more interesting. And one of the things that came out of this whole process of copying and positive, negative, bas relief, all that stuff, is whatever I was doing to the picture, I was simultaneously doing it to the sound. And it has such a different effect. It's like the image looks almost like it's becoming like a relief, like stone almost. It sort of feels three-dimensional. And yet at the same time the sound is becoming more and more plaintive. It's like it's going off into the distance and sounding a bit sad. It's like a very strange combination of things that happened just by that process. But in terms of the whole structure of the Academy, the film, yeah, I printed off a lot of stuff, and I had to edit it. There's some joins in there. It wasn't all done, in one big reel. And I just creative development that goes from, the expectation of you think actually the film's going to start, but actually, I guess it's a little while before you realise that what you're watching is the film. By the way, the film was sold to the Australian Film Archive in Canberra quite some time ago, and then they asked me for another copy, and I dug around and found out the reason that they wanted another copy, that they'd buy another copy from me, is because obviously somebody thought this was a faulty film and would throw it in the bin. I'm sure it's quite nice. So I got a second sale out of that. Does that answer your question about maths? Animators, how are you all animators here? You have to be aware of maths, don't you, in animation? It's something that underpins everything you're doing.
When you started, did you plan it out, or was it just done on the fly as you went through?
It may look a bit more organised than it really was. It was just, I was trying stuff out, and like I'd had to do sections of material. Maybe I'd make a loop, because working with loops is very handy. Also in projection, by the way, I do a lot of work with my partner Lynn, where we put 3 or 4 projectors together, and work with sometimes with loops, sometimes with reel-to-reel material. You can make a loop that's this long, and it'll just endlessly go down the projector. But so that was also be part of the printing technique. So that countdown from 10 down to 3 or 2 is probably about this long. So that would make a nice little handy loop that I could put onto the printer and just print it, and then rewind the stop, print it again, but slightly displaced.
Well, when you're rewinding and reshooting, are you actually looking at the frame counter? How much is conscious? Do you have a permutation going, or is it instinctive? If you're rephotographing, creating loops and so on.
Yeah, but maybe if you're an animator, you're thinking like frame by frame. It's not actually made frame by frame. It's made in long stretches. So I'm doing buckets of stuff, and then I'm seeing what these lengths look like against these lengths, and then creating an order out of those.
So it's instinctive.
It may look like a lot more work than it really was. Maybe that's the way And one of the things about working in an animation department, people like Jonathan Hodgson and others, Martin and others, is the amount of labour that goes into animation. It's just phenomenal. And I just couldn't do that. I really wouldn't have the patience to do that. I did it, sound shapes, that is all done by hand, punching, and scratching onto the side of the film. But that's when I was young, I wouldn't do that now.
But your work is extremely painstaking.
I do spend a lot of time on certain things, but I wouldn't get into that sort of labour so much now. I don't think so.
A sense of modesty going on there.
Well, I'm just, I'm amazed at just how much work goes into an animation film.
About the first film, because I think you thought that might be a particularly interesting film for us, and we didn't ask any questions about it, and you sort of kind of answered the question I had. how did you actually sort of get synchronization? You've got the sort of circle, and you've got a slap, you've got a sound, and then you've got a triangle, and that has a sound. You did all of this sort of individually, sort of frame.
Yeah, so you just have a length of, like a ruler, and well.
And you fitted the sound to it afterwards?
No, it's all done at the time. What I really have to do now is do a little demonstration, which is what I do for my students. But if I turn the projector around, you'll see that there's the picture. The gate is here. The lens swings open. You've got the gate, but the light is coming through. The light's obviously inside the projector. I'll turn it on. It's going to be incredibly bright. Okay. Right. So you've got the light inside the projector there. You've got the optical sound head there. Sorry, the optical sound head and the light for the optical sound. Back on. So, if you make a mark, if you scratch right across the film, you're going to see a line, and a second later, in fact, it's 26 frames later, you're going to hear that sound. You're going to hear a beep sound or a plop sound kind of thing. So the reason is because you've got an intermittent mechanism for the image, and you need a smooth mechanism to create good sound. So you have this rollers and stuff, and that's why you have a loop at the top and the bottom to ease out the intermittent motion and turn it into a smooth motion by the time it reaches the sound head. So for sound shapes, I just basically, if I had decided I wanted a triangle with 6 little scratches on each frame, those would have to be made 26 frames ahead. So the 6 little scratches are appearing here in the projector, and the triangle is appearing there in the projector at the same time. So it wasn't subsequently done, as somebody suggested.
That little pattern shape with scratching on.
Yeah, well, what I thought I'd do is just try and create some kind of recognizable sound. It didn't have to be a beautiful sound, but something that I could identify every time I saw a triangle. It was going to have a certain sound attached to it, and you can just by hand, you can just about create, enough variation, because each one it's only one frame of sound that's happening, and it's only one frame of picture that's happening. But within that, I could create just enough to differentiate between the different shapes and give them each their own sort of sound character, as it were.
Did you do a bit of knocking about with just the optical soundtrack of trying different things out to get different sounds and working out how?
Yeah, I must have experimented quite a lot. I've done a lot of work with optical sound, and I've done a DVD, and I produced a book which goes in with a DVD, which explains all my processes, which I'm sort of explaining to you now. So yeah, I've done a lot of work. I mean, you can use chemicals to create soundtracks. I'll show you one or two now coming up, which involve images that are shot with a camera, which then create soundtracks. I've got a film coming up. The second one after this next one involves that technique. So it's turning into quite a technical session here.
You're trying to animators.
Right.
How long did it take?
Which one?
How long did it take?
This one? Sound shapes, for example.
So
How long did that one?
in time, I take you to do it. How long did it take you to do it?
Which film are you talking about? The sound. The first one you saw.
This one.
I don't know. I never thought I was making a film. That's the weird thing. I thought I was just experimenting. That's why I never showed it. And it was only later that I sort of showed it by chance, and people said, "Hey, they really like that." But I don't know how long it took. It just took a long time.
But it's in colour,
Well, the colour came much later on. It was punched using a hole punch. I just got a bunch of different shaped hole punches and punched them into black leader. And then, much later when I could afford it, I got some lab prints made. I had about 4 or 5 made. I can't remember why I had so many made. And I thought I'd just try one with colour. And just got the marker pen. So this is the original. No, so it's not the original film. You would have the actual punches in it. This is a print, and it's got original hand colouring on top of it. That was quite neat.
When you say you hand coloured every frame,
Yeah.
that's a lot of hand colouring.
No, it's not. No, just get a marker pen.
It's animation.
No, it's not a lot of work. You see a circle, you just put a red bit of marker pen on top of it. So it's not like a long. It's not like there's only one frame for each one, and they're separated by a bit of, like every 12 frames. This will take one. Yeah, maybe I should accept that I'm an animator by the time of
Has anyone drawn comparisons between these works and the work of Norman McLaren, for example?
No. No, not particularly.
Okay. May I make an observation?
Yeah, go on.
That there is some, there is some continuity, I think, between your work and some of Norman McLaren's work directly on film. Although I think your purposes and objectives were very different. I think there's a certain overlap.
Yeah.
You painted on film,
Yeah.
He was a lot more anthropomorphic though, wasn't he? And then
Yeah, you couldn't avoid putting something anthropomorphic in it, really.
Not abstract towards the end, but was it synchrony or something?
Yeah, some of them are lovely, amazing things that he does, or did. I actually went up to Stirling recently, and there's a big exhibition there, a permanent exhibition of his drawings, quite Stirling and Stirling University. Of those two, like Norman McLaren and Lynn Loo, I sort of identified with Lynn Loo more than Norman McLaren, because I just love his sense of his playfulness and his the musicality of it. But yeah, Norman McLaren is incredible artist as well. But there is something a bit Mickey Mouse that he puts in there at the end, which I don't quite go along with.
Yes, I'm trying to remember the name of the particular film. Maybe it is Synchrony, which is very mathematical and consists of square shapes and stuff.
That's the one.
Yeah.
He cheats slightly in that it's supposed to be the same idea, you know, what you see in the frames, what's on the optical track, but he actually sort of coloured it and did various things. But it's the same. He was supposed to be able to I mean, he could do whole tunes. I mean, whether that's a merit or not, I don't know. But, you know,
Well, he would actually, I mean, the way his technique was to have the camera pointing down to a table, and then he'd have a set of cards, which he'd have a widened frame, a bit like, say, Super 16 films now, uses a wider frame. So it shoots film where the optical soundtrack would be. So he had a camera which would take in the optical soundtrack when he takes a frame, but he'd put down a card with various patterns on it, and that would give a certain pitch. But he was thinking of sound in terms of like boom, 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 that kind of stuff. You know, it's like tones and pitches, set pitches. I can't imagine him doing noise. You know? He's really happy with that. Shall we move on?
Yes. Unless there are any more questions.
Questions? We can always come back to stuff.
So, are you using this projector again, or do you want
Yeah, I'm going to. Well, actually, I put this into two halves. This program. You better tell me when to stop. Actually.
Well, if you've got two halves, then tell me when you finish the first half. We'll do it that way.
It's 8:30. Is it okay?
Yeah, that's
fine. So there are two more on this, and then I'm going to show you a work in progress piece, and then there'll be a break. So but perhaps we shouldn't talk too much. So this next one actually was a bit of an oddity again. Taking this chance to show you some oddities. This was from a film called Newsprint, which I also made in 1972, like the sound shapes. And with Newsprint, I took a newspaper. It was actually on Sunday. It was a colour supplement. It was Easter Sunday, 1972, and I spent the whole day pasting strips of newspaper onto clear film, and that creates the image and the soundtrack. I wanted to see what happened with all these sort of rollover patterns, possibly, with all the text of different sizes and widths and so on. There was a section at the end which was the colour supplement. which I didn't have the technology to, or the money perhaps, to make a proper print from, because I couldn't. The film that was print, the newspaper that stuck to the film, wouldn't go through a projector. It was too thick, so I had to make a print. But the Filmmakers Co-op came in handy there. I could make a print, and I could do the soundtrack there of the black and white. But I couldn't do the color, and it was much later. It was a few years ago, in fact, about 5 years ago. An archive in Amsterdam got hold of this film, and they said, "Is it okay if we do a print of the colour section too?" I said, "Fine, yeah, do that." And so now I've got this little colour section at the end, which I've never shown in this country, I don't think. I've shown somewhere else. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the soundtrack. So this is the colour coder, should we say, from newsprint. And I have to thank a man called Jan Scholten, who's the Dutch man at the Netherlands Film Archive, who optically printed this, which is another kind of printing, but we should talk about later if you like. Well, I'll explain how this film was made. It's actually made in one take initially from when I started teaching up in Wolverhampton. I was on the train a lot, and so I'd be going up and down. So it's made by winding in the days when the train window could be lowered, I clamped my camera to the side to the window, and it's looking out across the landscape, and it's filming the journey from Birmingham to London using a slow rotating shutter speed. So it's a time-lapse film, but in a way there's two kinds of time-lapse. There's time-lapse where you can go like that, or you can have like a long exposure time and then move on long exposure time. So this was a shutter which would just gradually go around like that, and it would record the lights in the landscape at different lengths depending on how close they are to the train. So if it's a light that's very close, they would right across. Some distance, it would just be just like a pinpoint. So that original piece of film, which lasted about 2 minutes, was the length of the film. When I projected it, I found it interesting, but not. Also, I just wondered how I could push it a bit further. So I used to take similar technique to one at the academy, where I would print the film and then wind it back and displace it by one frame, print it again, wind it back, print it again. And I think I did about 9 times. So each individual frame, which is just like 1/24th of a second, or even less than that, became about a bit under half a second. So the way I sort of think about it, the animation sort of way of looking at it would be, say you had a pile of totally transparent acetates, the see-through or gels or cells, they call them, and you had an image, a fresh image on each one, a new image, and they're piled up, and then you take one off the bottom and you put a new one on the top, and you keep doing that. It's that sort of idea, so that all the frames are blending with each other. It's like an incredibly multi-layered visual mix of adjacent frames. Got it?
Just what did you shoot on?
That's the first
Bolex,
stage.
or?
Yeah, shot on the Bolex camera. Yeah. And I've one or two things that actually, that was shot on Bolex, because with the time-lapse mechanism that I had, which is a very rudimentary one running off a big battery, it would take a whole roll. Yeah, it wasn't quite the whole roll. So when he pulls into that station, suddenly everything sort of, for a moment, becomes clear what it is you're looking at, and then the train goes up again, and it's just like streaks of light. So you can show that film in some context, and people think it's been like orchestrated or something. Anyway, that was the picture side. Now the sound, I wasn't thinking about sound at the time, optical sound, but later I thought, hey, this has got all the ingredients of being a really interesting soundtrack, because it's got lots of horizontal lines. If we have that, and some of them quite fine, that gives you a variety of sound. So I used the technique to, or a technique that I developed to copy the image area into the soundtrack area.
What was that? Can you describe that?
Oh, you really want to know?
Yeah, of course.
I'm worried about people
Okay,
falling asleep with all the technical explanation. But it's very, okay, so you make a spare print and you slice it in two down the length. There's a thing called, well, those who work with film, amateur film, you know, a generation ago might have been using standard 8 film, or Super 8, which is 8mm wide. But standard 8 is a 16mm width film, which is put through a splitter. It's basically a little round gadget, and you put the film at one end, pull it through, and it splits it into two 8mm widths. So it's like a sort of commercial way of using existing filmmakers' film stock to make an amateur film gauge. And so I put it through one of these splitters, so now I've got the same film. I just rolled it over, and then I taped it, like every 12 frames, so I put a bit of tape across, transparent tape, and that's the soundtrack, and that's printed separately.
So the soundtrack is sort of the middle of the image, roughly?
Well, yeah, what you're hearing would be sort of just off the middle of the image, yeah, as it's rolled over. And then, fortunately, the Filmmakers Co-op had a machine, actually it's still in use by Four Corners in Bethnal Green. They've adopted that same piece of debris contact printer. They had this debris contact printer would allow you to print a picture, but then also there's a sound head, but the sound head was fed by a separate reel. So the picture reel would be like this, and the sound head would come, the sound reel would come right out and go to the sound head. It was a little bit complicated, but it sort of worked. And then you have to sort of sync up the pictures with the sound and make sure it's all working together. But I made about 4 films using that technique, and they all use vertical, horizontal lines. Well, they use horizontal lines, but in one, which is actually railings, which I brought with me, but I don't think I'll show because there won't be time. That has railings, but then I have to put the projector on its side to get. I put the camera on its side, and then I have to put the projector on its side to get everything to look horizontal.
Do you still have to do that? I mean, if you showed that now, would you have to put your
Yes, I would be
projector
putting the
on the
projector on its side. And you'd have a vertical image. Yeah. This is very old school. Right, the last thing before we have a break, I'm just going to show something which, just to show that I'm still kind of trying to be active in this area of work, as well as new technologies, digital technologies. I'm going to show a piece called Remjet. And I've never shown it as a strip before. This is just a work in progress, okay? So don't expect something that's not going to happen. Here we go. So as I'm lacing up, I'll try and explain what Remjet, how I came to make this film. I do an introduction for handmade techniques at Middlesex on the animation course, and I was trying to find what kind of material I could use to make, for people to scratch into and so on. And I had a lot of old colour film stuff, which sort of raw film that was designed to go in a camera, but it's colour, and you scratch through it. Unfortunately, you don't see what you've done because it has a thing called a Remjet backing. Remjet is a removable jet black backing, which is actually, it sounds so technical, isn't it? Anti-halation layer. So it stops the light bouncing around on the film, making a blurry image. So halation, the word halo comes, it's a variation on that. So it stops halos around the image. So it's used on colour film stock, but not on black and white for some reason. And so I discovered that I could scratch, if I scratch on both sides, then I could see the bits where the images overlap. So that's what I did. The sound needs a bit of work. It's it needs very careful filtering to get a decent quality sound out of this, and a bit more amplification power than we have here. Actually, thanks to Martin, we did manage to get a decent volume out of that. I was experimenting actually with this thing here. Now, this is the Ike loudspeaker, and if you get a speaker and you put a bit of paper on the top and you blast it with sound, it goes. You get an actual physical, flapping of the paper on the actual tone of the speaker because the air is actually moving. And that's the kind of thing, if I was to turn that into some sort of installation, which is possible by looping it, I might develop that sort of idea so that the actual physical marking, which creates the sound and the image in the first place, becomes evident in the way it's actually, affecting the physical space that you're in. I mean, it is anyway because it's emitting sound waves, but it's more evident if you hear this. You see the paper flapping around. As a result of the light passing of the film passing of the light on the projector. So that's really
is that how the image was made? That you're actually you're sending a sound to the paper, vibrating the chassis, that's not the colour, and then
the cone is vibrating the what's it?
That's it, and you're filming that. I'm not with you.
No, okay.
I'm sorry. I'm done. So we're deep.
Perhaps we all need a drink. If anyone wants to look at the film itself, you can just see it's got scratches on both sides, and it's where the scratches overlap that you get these sort of sparkles. I'll try and think about that.
How are you actually scratches?
Huh?
How are you actually scratching?
By literally scratching it yourself.
Yeah.
So you have all these neat
What's that?
You have all these neat parallel lines. No, you're not using a code like Lynn Loo. How are you doing that?
I mean, just using a ruler and
very
a
neat.
safety pin. You can do it if you just have to get organised. Just lay down the length, move it slightly.
Yeah, how do you decide how long each scratch should be? Because it seems, again, there's a rhythm.
Well, again, it's experimenting, isn't it? It's a work in progress. Right. I mean, I just put actually, I should say that I have never shown it as a length before, but I have shown it once with my partner Lynn, where actually I was doing a sound mix and she was working with, I think it was 3 projectors with loops. So there were each little section was one loop on each projector, and then they were creating a combined image on the screen, in which the focus was shifting, the size was shifting, and the sound was being filtered in different ways. So it was I really thought of it as a performance, because over the last 10 or so years, working with Lynn, I've been doing largely performance work, which like multi-projection performances where we'd work with, 6 was the most we had, it's a bit unruly, but from 2 to 6 projectors, and trying to create films which are happening sort of in the moment of watching them in a way, because they're live performances, and they'll never quite be the same again, that particular sort of combination of material. So this, this is something that could happen, could have a life as a linear film as well. Any more thoughts, or should
we have a quick break?
Yeah. Okay.
So about 10 minutes, something like that. Guy, what is your drink? What is your?
Oh. I think it's my turn to buy drinks.
Well, I was thinking.
Got volunteers who's going to buy you a drink.
Well, look, can we have a big round of applause for Guy?